Tony Sheldon, the National Secretary of the Transport Workers Union. Well, first of all, we're seeing yet another day where Qantas has spread more rumours right across all the media outlets saying about what is or isn't going to be happening at Qantas. Quite clearly, the company has made some very poor strategic decisions about its investment in Asia with its Jetstar operations. Hundreds of millions of dollars a year have been lost to Jetstar. At the same time, the federal government is saying unless you slash Australian family incomes, unless you outsource more work overseas, unless you put more capital into your failed operations in Asia that employ few, if any, Australians, then we will not give you support. It's quite clear the government's made a decision that this is not about saving Australian jobs, this is about auctioning Australian jobs off for executive salary increases. In this last 12 months, we've seen job loss announcements after job loss announcements, yet Qantas keeps getting it wrong. When you are losing hundreds of millions of dollars in Southeast Asia with its Jetstar operations, you don't do like a tradesman would stupidly do. You don't sell your tills off and think you're going to make a profit. You do not, like a tradesman, do what Qantas is doing. Sell off your tools and then have nothing left to show for it. Qantas is selling off its profitable arm whilst trying to prop up its Southeast Asian failed expansion, which is costing hundreds of millions of dollars a year. I'm right for questions.
So Mr Truss this morning said that Qantas has got to put its own house in order. Can't expect governments or anybody else to do that for them.
Well, Warren Truss has made two important announcements recently. One is that the Qantas Sale Act and the ownership of Australia's national interest should be auctioned off to overseas arrangements. This is quite clearly the reasons why we're in this trouble with Alan Joyce and the board, because they've been auctioning off Australia's interest, and the federal government's saying, let's speed it up, let's get rid of the Qantas Sale Act, and let's underwrite this failed strategy which is against the national interest.
Are you worried that Qantas is putting these figures out and managing expectations and that the job losses will be severe?
Well, two things have happened with these figures that have been going out from Qantas. That is that they've had a bump in the shareholder price, and I call an ASIC to investigate whether there's been profiteering in the last couple of weeks. And secondly, whether there's been an occasion by Qantas to try to soften the ground when you tell the Australian public that we are destroying and dismantling your airline. It is against the national interest, and when the federal government says we'll only give you support if you decrease family wages, decrease family incomes, and turn around and export jobs and capital overseas, that's against the national interest, and that's a government not acting in the national interest.
Where do you expect the job losses will hit?
Well, quite clearly the company has said that they will decrease jobs in Australia and outsource by having lower family incomes in this country, and they're doing that to their profitable arms within the airline. At the same time, they're saying that they'll export jobs overseas. And your guess is going to be as good as all the public's guess, as well as the workforce's guess. The only person I ask, and that is, you've been having discussions, Joe Hockey, with Alan Joyce. You've funded and encouraged the exporting of these jobs. Come clean with the Australian public and tell us where our jobs are being taken away from us.
Do you expect it to be sort of maintenance areas and ground crew sort of area? What do you expect?
Well, I'm expecting that Joe Hockey knows where these jobs are being lost. I bet that Joe Hockey knows which families are having their income slashed. We're having undue pressure on family incomes in this country, and Joe Hockey's got a secret deal with Alan Joyce about auctioning jobs, auctioning Australia's interest, and turning around and exporting more overseas. That's an arrangement which is against the national interest.
I guess can Qantas wait till Thursday to make these announcements, or does it need to come out now?
Well, what Qantas has quite clearly been doing, along with Warren Truss, what Alan Joyce and the federal government's been doing, is raising the issue of the Qantas Sale Act being auctioned off to overseas interests. They won't be satisfied until we have Aeroflot with a kangaroo on its tail. Well, we're calling on a grand compact with Qantas. Work with your workforce, just like they do in Cathay Pacific, just like they do in Southwest Airlines, a major airline in North America, one of the most aggressive competitive markets in the aviation industry. They make a profit, they have a compact with their workforce, and they are successful. You can take the low road that Joe Hockey's requiring Qantas to do, or you can take the high road where airlines are more successful than Qantas.
Does the union accept that or believe in that Qantas needs to look at its overheads, needs to look at its efficiencies? I mean, you know, something may have to
Every company should look at its efficiencies. Every company should look at its productivity. But do you think that telling the travelling public that this airline is in a desperate state encourages people to catch their planes? Do you think saying to the workforce that you're redundant at every few months is going to encourage people to work hard for this company? They love Qantas, but the management has decided to destroy the icon, and the icon's worth saving. Joe Hockey has jumped on their bandwagon. He's been hoodwinked by them, or has he hoodwinked them?
Is there any more room for outsourcing in the areas covered by the TWU? I mean, we've lost a lot of areas, haven't we? They've been just chipping away over them.
Well, what quite clearly that Qantas has decided, when they decided on this failed strategy of losing hundreds of millions of dollars in its Asian expansion, employing overseas workers rather than Australians, that they've been going after their profitable arm. This company has 65% of the domestic market, yet they continue to outsource jobs overseas, and they continue to outsource jobs within the country, slashing family incomes on profitable routes and profitable arrangements within this airline. And now Joe Hockey and the federal government has said, we want more of it, we want less pay for Australian families, we want more jobs outsourced, and we want the profitable arm sliced off when it should be actually turning around and making sure this company is successful in the future.
What do you think Virgin will make of all this?
Well, this is the thing. The Australian public would rightly be questioning why this company is going down this route, other than a drivel about poor strategic decisions, about a drivel about making sure they keep the politicians happy in federal government down in Canberra, because otherwise they don't get their money. If they don't get their money, then they can't slash these jobs.
Does the union think that maybe we could be starting to see the end of such a national icon? It might not exist. I mean, we've seen Ansett, we've seen Australian go by the by. Could Qantas be a thing of the past soon?
Well, we saw in the case of Ansett where there was poor investment by the executives of that company. We saw the pressures that have occurred before in this airline because of that sort of management decisions, and we're seeing the same progress being made here. Quite clearly, the federal government isn't underwriting an airline to turn around and make it successful for Australia. They're underwriting an airline on the basis of making it less successful for the national interest. That is against what is in this country's interest. It's against what's in the community's interest, and certainly against what's in our security interest in this country. Economically, we cannot rely on other companies, other airlines from the Middle East or from Asia to represent our economic interests in this country, let alone our national security interests. Australia, just like many other countries, both developed and developing, have their own airlines, and the Australian government has decided to jettison our interests.
Tony, how will the union respond if the worst predictions about job losses come to pass? Will there be strikes?
Well, quite clearly it's up to the workforce to make a decision about what action should be taken. But I'd say this to the Australian community, and I'd say this to Joe Hockey. Get the Australian community, get out there and make sure Joe Hockey comes clean. Make sure that he actually underwrites an airline to be successful, rather than just underwrite an 82% wage increase that the executives have paid themselves since their disastrous 2010 decisions that are destroying this airline.
So you want no government backing for guaranteeing all this, and you want no change to the Sale Act?
There should be no change to the Sale Act, no taxpayer underwriting by the federal government, until this company comes clean about how they're going to save this airline, not how they're going to export jobs and capital overseas and decrease the family income of hard-working Australians.
But seemingly that's exactly what the government wants to see. They want to see these job cuts in order to make that very step.
Well, this is quite clear what the federal government has said, and that is that they want Australian families getting paid less. They want outsourcing to be done overseas. And we've seen hundreds of millions of dollars lost in Southeast Asia. I don't know what's been happening at these secret meetings with Joe Hockey, but they've been secret, they've been behind closed doors, and they've obviously been going on for weeks. Joe Hockey, come clean with the Australian public. What's been said, what's been agreed to, and why did you agree with it?
Any thoughts about the possible sale of Jetstar and the frequent flyer?
Well, quite clearly, this company and this executive are following through when we're able to stop the purchase of this airline by equity funds. They're following through the equity fund dilemma about how you deal with an airline. They're following through with an equity fund slash, burn, slice and dice, and the only people that make money in those circumstances are the executives, not the Australian public, not the workforce that have this iconic airline in their heart and soul, not the Australian community, but certainly those ones that make the money at the top, and that's the executives. Well, quite clearly the board should change its strategy, and if that means jettisoning anyone in the executive team that fails to change that strategy, then they should be gone. It means that every executive in this airline, and this board, should be turned around and held to account by the Australian community, because Joe Hockey's not. He's supporting hundreds of millions of dollars being sent overseas into their failed exercise. And quite clearly this board has to change its strategy, and it has to have an executive team that follows a strategy to make this airline successful, not just follow through an arch-old plan that was hatched by the equity funds so many years ago to slash, burn this airline right to the ground.